You think obedience limits you. It sounds like the opposite of freedom, a narrowing of choice, a surrender of independence. Freedom, you believe, means to move without restriction, to follow what you desire. Yet Abdul Al Qadar al-Jilani questioned this certainty. He said the soul is never more imprisoned than when it follows itself. What you call freedom may only be obedience to your own impulses, an endless service to what you mistake for autonomy. He asked, if obedience to truth quiets the restless self, is that confinement or release? If refusal keeps you bound to your own desires, is that freedom or servitude? The paradox is clear. You obey something in every moment. The only question is, what do you obey? You call freedom the power to choose. But each choice arises from needs and fears that precede it. Your freedom depends on what influences you. Abdul Al Qadar said that the one who worships choice itself becomes enslaved by preference. Every decision promises relief, but another follows. You are never at rest because the chooser never rests. He taught that true freedom is not endless decision, but release from the need to decide. It is the state in which action and truth are one dot. So the question turns, when choice itself becomes compulsion, what kind of freedom is that? You say, I chose. But who is that I? You did not design your temperament, your tendencies, or your fears. They move within you, yet you call them yours. Abdul Al Qadar described this self as a claimant, constantly asserting ownership to conceal dependency. Its so-called freedom is only obedience to unseen causes. The ego obeys its own habits and calls it will. When you trace a single impulse to its origin, you find only repetition, patterns, that decide before you are aware of deciding dot. So where does obedience end and freedom begin if both belong to the same illusion of self? For Abdul Al Qadar, obedience was not submission to command, but alignment with reality. There is obedience born of fear, and obedience born of recognition. The first diminishes. The second liberates. When you obey because you understand, not because you fear, obedience becomes clarity. The will no longer struggles with what is true. It acts without conflict. He said the one who aligns with truth no longer obeys outwardly. He simply moves as reality moves. In that state, duty is replaced by harmony. Can there be true obedience without the weight of compulsion, when the act itself is indistinguishable from understanding? You often equate defiance with strength. You resist what you do not understand. Believing opposition proves independence. Yet resistance ties you to what you resist. Abdul Al Qadar said, rebellion against the divine order is not freedom, but preoccupation. It consumes attention, binds energy, and deepens separation. The rebel becomes a servant of what he fights. Every no creates another chain. He taught that refusal to accept reality is the purest form of captivity, a constant argument with what already is. If resistance enslaves and alignment releases, what remains of your idea of strength? You fear surrender because you confuse it with ignorance. To surrender, you think, is to stop questioning. But Abdul Al Qadar saw it as the final act of reason. Thought fulfills its purpose when it recognizes its boundary. Beyond that boundary, obedience begins, not blind, but clear. The mind cannot dominate what sustains it. It can only acknowledge. In that acknowledgement, certainty appears without argument. The mind that obeys reality does not become weak. It becomes quiet. Is the highest intelligence found in the one who commands, or the one who listens perfectly? If all things follow divine will, what is left of human will? Abdul Al Qadar answered that the two are not opposites but reflections of one truth. Human will is the instrument through which the divine will expresses itself. When you imagine them separate, you live in conflict. When you see their unity, you rest. To obey the real is to allow will to return to its source. Then action flows without resistance. When every motion is already sustained by the real, what does it mean to claim, "I act"? Abdul Al Qadir explained that freedom depends on order within the soul. The spirit must guide the intellect, and the intellect must guide desire. When this hierarchy collapses, the lower rules the higher. Desire dictates, intellect justifies, and spirit is silenced. Then obedience turns downward, truth serves appetite. But when the rightful order returns, peace follows. The intellect obeys what transcends it, and desire obeys wisdom. Disobedience, then, is not moral failure, but disorder. It is confusion about what should lead and what should follow. Can the lower rest until it remembers what is higher? Abdul Al Qadar called the fruit of obedience stillness, not the stillness of inaction, but of undivided will. When you act without resistance, the movement is whole. The mind stops debating, the heart stops arguing. Everything moves in one direction. This is not passivity, but simplicity. Disobedience multiplies movement. Every motive pulls apart from the others. But obedience gathers them. In that gathering, peace appears as function, not as reward. So you ask, what if stillness is not the end of action, but its most complete form? At first, obedience feels like something you do. Later, it becomes something that happens through you. Abdul Al Qadar said that when obedience matures, the sense of ownership fades. The servant realizes he never acted apart from the command itself. Action flows as necessity, not as possession. The I that claims obedience dissolves, yet the work continues. Awareness remains, but the doer is gone. This is not erasure, but precision. The removal of what was never real. If the obedient one disappears, who is left to obey? When the illusion of ownership ends, obedience and freedom merge. Abdul Al Qadar taught that freedom is not the power to do what you wish, but the clarity to wish only what is real. The will that mirrors truth cannot conflict with it. Obedience becomes effortless because resistance has no ground. You do not submit. You coincide. Freedom is no longer pursued. It is recognized as the state that was always there beneath struggle. When nothing in you resists what is, what else could freedom mean? In the end, obedience is not an act but a recognition. Everything already obeys. Every atom, thought, and motion moves according to a single order. Abdul Al Qadar's path leads to seeing this, not by retreating from life, but by awakening within it. The soul's freedom lies not in control, but in consent to what already is. When illusion of separation ends, the servant and the command are one. To obey the real is not to yield. It is to understand. The mind stops contending with reality and begins to coincide with it. Then the question fades. What once seemed opposite, obedience and freedom, are revealed as two words for the same truth. The journey begins in conflict. You fear that obedience confines and freedom liberates. Through reflection, Abdul Al Qadar reveals that the self's rebellion is the true prison. Every attempt to control reality becomes another form of servitude. As understanding deepens, obedience is redefined as harmony. The intellect, desire, and spirit returning to their rightful order. The self that once resisted now dissolves. leaving only awareness moving with what is real. Freedom was never outside obedience. It was hidden within it. To obey the real is to cease opposing truth. And in that cessation,